We will do what no one thought possible. We will finally fix school finance in Texas.
Before gaveling out for the last time a week ago, the 86th legislative session followed through on one of Governor Abbott's top priorities. They passed $11.6 billion to address school finance. It includes a per-student funding hike, property tax cuts, raises for teachers, librarians, and counselors, and dedicates money for free, full-day pre-K.
Go bill, and it's a big issue.
This is not a Republican issue or a Democratic issue. This is a future issue. This is a children's issue.
In December, Governor Abbott called the state's Robin Hood law broken and challenged lawmakers to fix it. Last week, he applauded their work.
We are funding districts and education no longer on the basis of the wealth of a school district, but on the needs of our individual students.
Previously, the weight of tax recapture crippled school districts in cities like Austin, Houston, and Dallas.
This bill resolves equity, and it ensures that all students, whether they're in a wealthy district or a poor district or a rural district or an urban district, they will know that Texas leaders care about the quality and the funding of their...
Leaders call the bill a major victory for education in Texas.
We have had the Super Bowl of legislative sessions in the history of this state, and I think in the history of the country.
But the new education overhaul is less than perfect. Last-minute compromises only reduced recapture instead of eliminating it, and left some ideas off the table entirely.
I don't think anyone here is going to like absolutely everything in the bill.
Hundreds of teachers spent their spring break rallying for more pay. Pay raises included in the bill aren't as much as some had hoped.
This potential in this new bill will improve our bottom line, but it won't go so far as to be giving us the capacity to give 10% raises to every teacher.
Joining us tonight to discuss the final bill, a panel of statewide education leaders. Representative James Tallarico with the House Education Committee. He helped shape the school finance bill. Austin ISD's Chief Financial Officer, Nicole Conley Johnson. She's responsible for managing the district's $1 billion budget and who helped create last year's School Finance Commission report. Shannon Holmes, the Executive Director of the Association of Texas Professional Educators. He says they've waited years to see a bill like this pass. And Sherry Doss, who as the president of Texas PTA actively organized 500,000 members to advocate for students across the state as lawmakers hammered out bills. Thank you for joining us tonight for this roundtable discussion on the billions of dollars headed to boost Texas education. Now, before we begin with our panelists we have with us tonight, we want to share how you can participate in tonight's conversation. CBS Austin's Hema Muller joins us live in studio with what you need to know to get your questions answered. Hema?
Well, we know there's a lot to talk about here, and we are asking for your questions and concerns about school finance and teacher pay raises. You can reach out to us throughout this town hall at facebook.com/CBS Austin. You can also tweet us using the hashtag #YourVoiceYourFuture. You see it right there. We'll feature your questions and comments for our panelists throughout tonight's discussion. Walt.
Thanks, Hema, and thank everyone for joining us tonight. A lot of blood, sweat, and tears went into this session, especially for this bill. Following House Bill 3's passage, Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick released a statement calling it, quote, a landmark school finance reform bill that will be transformative for Texas and will help ensure that public schools in our state become the #1 in the nation. Now, Governor Abbott also used the word transformative to describe the $11.6 billion education and tax package. It's a big bill, but really, is it transformative? The big question tonight, especially you have been in the trenches, is it transformative?
I'd say yes. It's a substantial progress in curing a flawed system that we all sort of were living under for almost 30 years. The bill includes a lot of provisions and elements that I think will accelerate some of the right things to do, the good programming that we know that makes a difference for our students, like dual language, funding allotments for dyslexia, recognizing students need additional support, and in the basic allotment, almost a 20% increase. That's the most substantial increase we've seen in the last 10 years. 10 years ago, we were only getting about $4,700 a kid. Now we're going to 6160. So that infusion is something that's going to substantially help defray some of the costs that school districts have been absorbing over the last 10 years. The last LBB report indicated that school districts have had to absorb about 7% in inflation. So the buying power the capacity that school districts had was greatly diminished. So this is a step in the right direction, and I think it's going to accelerate a lot of good programming across all school districts in the state.
So are you sleeping now? The numbers look a little better at AISD?
They look a lot better than they do today, but they're certainly not perfect. We're still going to be challenged with the deficit, and we're still going to have to learn how to spend our money smart. We're so, funding is so constrained here in Texas, so we've got low funding levels that we have to be as strategic and efficient as possible. And so we're going to be looking to sort of make some, not necessarily cut corners, but we're going to make some changes so that we can maximize our resources. But it does take the edge off.
Nice. We'll dive deeper into some of those changes and expectations. Now, Representative, you were in the trenches on this. Was it transformative?
I believe so, and I think what makes it transformative is that our bill focused on improving student outcomes. It's providing our system with much needed funding. It's relieving our property taxpayers, but most importantly, it's changing education policy to ensure that our students are successful in K through 12 and beyond. I think that's what makes this a transformative bill, and that's really a testament to my fellow committee members on the House Public Education Committee who developed this bill from the earliest stages, and the School Finance Reform Commission who heard from experts about how to make sure we're improving teaching and learning, not just providing more funding, but providing that smart strategic funding that's going to make a difference in the lives of kids.
That's always been an argument. You can't just throw more money at it, right? It's not going to fix everything.
Sure. Well, and I think our system desperately needs more funding,
sure.
And every education researcher will tell you that you have to have a certain amount of funding as a bare minimum to make progress for students. But just providing funding is not going to do the trick. What we've got to do is making sure that we're spreading best practices in school districts across the state to ensure that our students are learning and are achieving at high levels, particularly early literacy, which I really credit our committee and the School Finance Commission for focusing on, because if students are not mastering literacy by third grade, the outcomes that they're going to be facing don't look good as they go from elementary school to middle school and beyond.
And you're telling those dollars where to go instead of just saying, okay, here's the money.
Right, and using them for things that we know work. So full day pre-K, which folks have been advocating for years in Texas, we're finally getting that for our low-income students. Things like increasing teacher pay, things like college, career, military readiness, dyslexia funding, blended learning. I mean, these things are what has proven to work in school districts across the country. Now we're bringing them to Texas and spreading it across the state.
Okay, and if anybody knows how to fundraise, it's the PTA. Sherry, you know that's a big issue for parents. They're always on the front lines trying to get their kids the best money, the best opportunities. Is this a transformative bill? Were you happy to see it?
We are happy to see it. We've been fighting for school finance reform for just a number of years. In addition to just increasing the funding, but as Nicole and Representative Tallarico said, increasing the basic allotment so that the school districts can use those funds as far as what's needed in their district, but also some targeted monies. We're particularly excited for the early literacy piece of it, because we certainly believe the earlier we start with our children, the more successful they'll be, but also finally to see some funds dedicated towards providing resources that the students that are at risk need, so that we really can have an equitable education. That's really what PTA fights for. Our tagline is every child, one voice. We want every child to have the opportunity to be successful. So we're really excited to see just about all of our legislative priorities around education this term were actually addressed in House Bill 3. So we're super excited.
So you think less students will fall through the cracks now because of this boost?
I certainly think it's yeah. I mean, we're getting started with that, and it's not going to happen overnight. But at least now we have some resources and some funds to get that going, and particularly in the pre-K. If we can get those kids that are at risk kind of on a level playing ground before they get to kindergarten, then yeah, we have a bright future ahead of us.
Sure. Shannon, thanks for your patience.
Yeah.
Professional educators, happy with this? Transformative?
Yeah, it's a very good bill, a very transformative bill. It's the first time in a long time that the legislature has acted without a court decision. And so that's important, that's historic. There's, like Nicole mentioned, 20% increase in the basic allotment. money for teacher compensation increases, pre-K funding, a buy down of recapture. Those are things that haven't happened in a long time.
How long have you been fighting for this?
20 years.
20 years, yeah. It's a big deal, a big issue. We've got some people chiming in now on social media. Let's go over to Hema and see what she's got.
While we're getting right into this on Twitter, our first question tonight comes from James Quintero TX. He asks, school districts will receive billions more in revenue this biennium. What kind of student achievement improvement can Texans expect from all this new spending?
Nicole, you want to take that?
Sure. I mean, I think that, first off, we've had a lot of pent-up needs. I mean, a 30-year-old formula certainly is going towards supporting programming that may be already in existence. I know for Austin, we've had full-day pre-K for some time. We also have a dual language program. And so just getting the funding formula to structure to support the kinds of programming that's already happening is a bit of a catch-up. Mm-hmm. We all know the sort of level of Herculean efforts it takes to sort of move kids. We've got, most school districts, especially the urbans, are dealing with substantial learning gaps between our economically disadvantaged. So I would suggest, and I know that in Austin we're going to do like in other districts, we're going to create some supports, really programming centered on that grade 3. Like Representative said, it's grade 3 is sort of that first critical juncture in an education where it sort of sets the trajectory whether or not students are going to be successful in high school or even post-secondary results. So I'd say that we're all going to be moving fast to sort of get the infrastructure in place so we can have things like full-day pre-K across the state. We're certainly. I've been working with my counterparts across the state, and we're all sort of swapping ideas about how we can effectuate some of the components of this bill in the best way possible.
You want to weigh in that?
Yeah, first, it makes me so happy that people are talking about student achievement and closing achievement gaps. I think that's going to be the lasting impact of this bill, is galvanizing our state to focus on this immediate, urgent problem. Before I was a politician, I was a middle school teacher. Is the whole reason I ran for this office. So this is, I think, just a great session for Texas students. So to answer the question, I would look at two areas in particular, maybe three. One is kindergarten readiness. We talk about ensuring that we've got full-day pre-K across the state. We want to make sure our students are ready once they get to kindergarten. Second is third grade literacy and mastering reading skills, because as she said, third grade is when you stop learning to read and you start reading to learn, right? So we want to look at third grade reading. And last, I would look at college and career readiness as an area that we've put substantial resources behind. We want to make sure students are ready for post-secondary, whether it's a 4-year bachelor's degree or whether it's a career or technical education. The one area we haven't focused on, which given my background I hope we focus on next session, is the middle grades and middle school. We focused on early childhood, we focused on college and career and military readiness. We haven't focused on those middle grades, which I think is the next frontier as we talk about education policy in Texas.
I agree. We at least get a little bit of progress with extending the CTE
down
towards the middle grades.
Exactly
It's something
right.
we have been working on a couple sessions to get, because like most school districts, like in Austin, we start those pathways earlier in order for them to.
People are afraid of middle school.
Yeah,
so.
It is scary. I've got 2 middle schoolers and I don't know who they are.
You got a thick skin.
A lot going on there, yeah.
Yes.
But those layers are so important, as you talk about the foundation, then getting them through the middle school years and getting that foundation for college as well. It all matters. And this is actually going to provide a big leap forward to so many students now. Now, as we move on to recapture, of the many changes to the education system that this bill lays out is a decrease in how much districts like Austin ISD have to send to the state to help fund others. Now, over the next 2 years, the system will see those recapture payments reduced by 47%. The so-called Robin Hood plan is designed to force school districts in wealthier areas to share their property tax revenue with those in poorer areas, but the bill doesn't go so far as to eliminate the system entirely. So did lawmakers do enough by dialing back the recapture payments? Are we happy with where recapture is now, or is there more work to be done, or do you think it'll go away?
So I think it's a good start, right? Dialing back recapture by $3.6 billion is a solid start. It's not going to eliminate all recapture, but I think that it's a good first start, and I think that here in Austin ISD, you guys will see that immediately, right?
Yes, yeah. I mean, I'm sort of the recapture poster child. I think that's how I ended up on the commission.
You have the toughest job in the school district for sure.
I mean, and because of the frustration that I was always sort of getting from taxpayers who really didn't understand. They're paying record high tax bills. Some of our most historically economically challenged neighborhoods, we're seeing property tax increases of double digits. One of the biggest property tax increases is in our east side, which is being heavily gentrified, and folks are being literally priced out of their homes. So they wouldn't even qualify for the mortgages to get today that they're paying under since they've been historically there. So I felt the burn of recapture, having to answer those questions. It became enormously frustrating every time we have to sort of put on the bill, the state does not set your tax, when we know that the funding system necessitates a minimum tax rate. And so in Austin, we were sending half of every tax dollar we collected to the state under recapture. At the same time, we're closing schools, contemplating eliminating full-day pre-K. The local services that people see in their communities were, vulnerable. And so it's hard to comport that. The state had become so overly reliant on recapture, which is why you sort of saw the shift. Local taxpayers picking up much more of the cost of public education. Their increases over the last 6 years was about 51%. And so even in Austin, you can see that almost $1,700 of the tax bill was recapture. And so I think
people were angry.
People were angry. Taxpayer and property wealthy does not translate into wealthy students and families. Over 55% of our students and families are economically disadvantaged. So our property wealth has nothing to do with the services that we provide. And so I think cutting it in half and reducing some reliance
is a victory.
Is probably as far as we were going to get with this session. We're never going to be able to eliminate recapture. Austin is generous. We don't want to. We want to make sure all of our students have what they need, but just the overwhelming burden here, I think, was substantial. One of the things that the new elements of the funding formula, the way they recalculate sort of recapture is totally different. So that took some of the pressure off of the district's budget.
And well, can I say something unpopular? Recapture is a good thing, and it actually set Texas apart in our education history by being a bold step toward creating more equity. And actually in our state, comparatively across the nation, has actually ensured more equity than you would expect across the state. Now the problem, as she mentioned, is that our recapture system, our Robin Hood system, has gotten out of whack to where we have a lot of districts that need resources, sending more resources back to the state. And I think we've tweaked our recapture system in a way that will hopefully ensure equity for years to come. But I have to say that's something I'm proud of our state, and that we were kind of at the forefront in the nation on creating equity. And other states have studied our recapture system as one to replicate. The problem was that
we had an F in spending,
exactly.
but we were good on equity.
Yeah. Exactly.
Well, I think a lot of people didn't really see where their money was going to work.
Right.
Then you had these big hairy rumors starting about they're building a $60 million football stadium. But it really was trying to get that equity spread throughout. Recapture always a big topic, but this was. I'm sure you were smiling when you saw that. You were talking about budgets this week. You were already dealing with students and families just getting out of the district, and now this will actually provide some relief that's desperately needed.
Yeah, it's almost for Austin taxpayers. $250. That's the most relief that Austin taxpayers have seen in the whether at the city level, this last state session. So. I think it'll be well received from our Austin community.
It'll be a benefit to our surrounding districts too. I know a lot of our viewers are not just living in Austin ISD, but Round Rock ISD, which is the one I represent, the district I grew up in, was going to pay $68 million next year back to the state. And now with this new system, they're only going to pay $5.7 million. Yeah. So huge relief for districts across Central Texas, not just Austin ISD, even though I know Austin faces particular challenges. But it's going to help a lot of our local districts.
The way they were promoting this bill and this fight early on was that we got to get our teachers pay raises, right? Who's going to fight against that? As a teacher, pay raises fall short of the widely touted Senate promise of $5,000 per teacher and librarian. The final version does not include the across-the-board raises Patrick originally championed. Now, some are saying more than others. Who's getting left out? Is there anyone getting left out, or is this going to be in the weeds for a while as we figure out who gets
I don't know that anybody's getting left out. I think more people are actually getting included. So 30% of any district's revenue gain from House Bill 3 is actually going to go into, or be required to go into, educator compensation. And so of that 30%, 75% of that 30% is earmarked for teachers, counselors, librarians, and nurses. The other 25% can be used for any other classification of employee other than administrators. But that's the floor. That's what the legislature said is the floor, 30%. Districts can use anywhere from 30% to 100% for educator compensation. I think that we are just thankful for the investment in the human capital. Nothing impacts student achievement like the teacher in the classroom does. And so it's good to see that investment's taken place. And I hope that we can build on this in future sessions and make sure that our teachers are treated as professionals and compensated that way.
Now, does this all go to raises, or does it go to better benefits? Is it a package, or is it both, or one or the other? How does that get worked out? Do you know?
It's a combination. It does include benefits, right? Because we know that healthcare costs are going up 10 to 12% in any given year. So that's one of the positions, or many school districts sort of compel the legislator to give some flexibility, because we know we all are, for all of us, I think most districts would say their first priority is to pay their teachers more. That's the heart and soul of what we do. But it also takes a village, right? We have bus drivers, food service workers that all support in getting our students access to that classroom and to that learning. So we want the flexibility to be able to pay all of our employees who support our kids, but also be able to address some of the needs related to increased pension costs, as well as the healthcare costs, which is something that is beyond our control.
Everyone's dealing with that.
Yeah, everyone's dealing with it, and so we're very appreciative that the legislator sought to sort of see the dilemma of sort of focusing on just the salary piece. Would have probably put more districts in an adverse financial position. If we had to lock away so much of our gains into teacher salaries, we wouldn't be able to put monies where we needed to support programming or to cover those other costs.
And I'll just say that the fight over teacher pay raises between the House and the Senate wasn't about whether we should pay our teachers more. Every legislator believes we have to pay teachers more. We want to get us closer to the national average, and especially as a former teacher, I want to make sure our teachers are compensated for their work. The difference of opinion between the two chambers was a belief in local control. Folks in the House, including me, believe that teachers work for school districts, not for the state legislature. And so we should provide that funding directly to districts, and then they make HR decisions about compensation and about benefits. And frankly, some of us and some former educators were a little offended by the idea of an across-the-board $5,000 teacher pay raise, because if we're true professionals, which we are, we should be paid based on experience, based on teaching quality. The idea that you would pay the worst teacher in the state the $5,000 teacher pay raise, the same as the best teacher in the state, I think strikes a lot of us as off and frankly a little disrespectful and condescending to our profession. So I'm glad we were able to end up in a place where districts have flexibility on how to
merit.
Merit and experience, and making sure that we're empowering districts to make those decisions for themselves, because teachers work for locally democratically elected school board members and superintendents and principals. They don't work for politicians in Austin.
And they work hard.
And I would add that as PTA leaders, we try to subsidize some of the things that the districts can't always get around to or do, and teacher appreciation is a really big thing for us. PTA focuses on the child in terms of advocating, but everyone knows that a happy teacher is one of the most effective for your children, and we want the best for our children. So, everybody wants to be appreciated. We certainly believe that they need to be compensated appropriately. So we're excited to see some increase in monies for teachers, but not just teachers, as you mentioned, Nicole, everyone. And even in PTA, we recognize the custodians and the bus drivers, because we know, like you said, it takes a village. And so I think this is another way to show that how much we appreciate our educators. And then, with the addition of what PTA does in those schools to show that appreciation and subsidize some of those programs and things, I think we might see an uplift in morale in our teachers across our educators across the state.
Well, you guys really fill in the gap. Between the luncheons and the gifts and just the little perks, you want to feel appreciated. And the PTA does a good job of making that happen when the districts can't do it because of whatever, We have another question from social media. Hema, what do you have?
Yeah, the conversation's really going on social media. Don't forget, you can chime in with your questions with the hashtag #YourVoiceYourFuture. This question comes from DadRockATX. How does our per-student funding rank against other states with this new bill? And can the state sustain this level of funding?
Let me look at that. I think the past student funding was $5,140 per student. It goes to $6,160 per student. What does that mean? And
just to clarify, so that's the basic allotment,
okay,
which is the first part of a school finance formula that determines your total state entitlement.
Okay.
So your per student amount is going to be higher than that. But I think the point is well taken from Dad Rock, that we rank still far below a lot of our counterparts in per student funding. We're lucky that we actually get fairly good student results for the amount of money we spend. We're kind of middle of the pack on
efficient,
right. Yes, we are. We're middle of the pack on
exceptions.
student achievement, which I don't know any Texan who wants to be middle of the pack. But for student achievement, we're still certainly near the bottom. The second part of the question about can we sustain this, I think, is a separate conversation, and one that I'm certainly concerned about. I'm sure everybody around the table worries about how we can sustain this type of investment and where is additional revenue going to come from. And I believe that's going to be the hottest topic in the interim, and I think it'll be the hottest topic next session. Is how do we double down and really fund this investment that we've made in the 86th?
Is that a little scary for all of you guys? I mean, 2011, we all remember 2011. Is the legislature going to pull back in 2021? I think it's good times right now, right? Things are going great in Texas.
That's right. And that's what keeps me up at night, quite frankly. And I think districts like Austin are going to be very vulnerable to constrained spending. I'm hoping that we just don't stay flat for the next 20 years, not to mention potential cuts. And I honestly, I think that this is what we've seen in most states that have done this kind of and put in sort of tax caps. They've encountered some difficulties in sustaining services down the road. So we've got some good times now. We're hopeful that we'll continue with this boom, but my understanding of economics is that it probably won't last forever, and so we should start preparing for additional revenue alternatives so that we can sustain what we have, and then also maybe do a little bit more and progress the cure. Keep it going.
And I want to credit the School Finance Commission for putting forward revenue proposals.
Thank you.
Thank you for doing that.
I was the only one.
Yeah, and that's the responsible thing to do. And politicians don't want to talk about it. We never want to talk about raising revenue. But there's a lot of room in our state's tax code to do that without hurting, working class, middle class people in this state. There's enormous loopholes. You take the sales tax, for instance, which doesn't apply to any professional services, right? So if you're a consultant or a lobbyist, right, none of those transactions are taxed, whereas most anytime you buy a good, that's usually subject to a sales tax. So things like that, things like the severance tax, I think should all be on the table. We should look at everything. Nothing should be off limits when we talk about how best to continue supporting our students and our teachers. We're happy about the history we've made this session, but it doesn't matter if we can't sustain it next session.
It took so long to get here, and now I guess the fear is that this can't be one and done. Over these next 2 years, there need to be some solutions working and bubbling to the surface to make it happen. Is that something that you think about as well?
Yeah, sure. We're concerned about that. We think that the tax cap is going to create a hole over the course of the next biennium, and between now and the next legislative session, we've got to find a way to fill that gap. And so I hope that we'll all sit around the table at some point or have some kind of an interim commission on that so that we can make sure that we don't pull back after next session.
You might know each other better than you ever wanted to. That's right. We're still hanging out together. One of the PTA's legislative positions was seeking funding for pre-K. Very important. Lawmakers followed through and approved money for full-day pre-K. Is that spending universal? Is that going across the board everywhere?
I believe it's focused more on the communities that are at risk. Because those students typically don't have the resources available to them. They don't have a parent that can teach them how to read, or the ABCs at home or something like that, or even have the resources to get them to a preschool to learn all those kinds of things. So this is definitely going to be a way to sort of level out the playing field for those students. And as we pay attention to as the students graduate through the different levels, we find that we have to spend more resources on them later.
So
right,
if they're not getting that initial pre-K help,
it's worse down the road for them.
Especially by third grade. I mean, third grade is when decisions are made. So the earlier we can get them going, the better, and just have some students that need some help and some parents that need some help. And so we're really excited to just see that. So, and I know that with PTA, since we're all over the state, again, we like to supplement or partner with our districts, and that would be one of the programs we'll see where we can go in and help through our volunteering and kind of help with that and make sure most kids kind of get what they need.
And you know, the governor has muscle on this. This was a priority for him. He pushed this. If you want to make this happen, we got to get pre-K happening, which, you know, helped a lot, I think.
And I'm proud of us providing full day pre-K for the first time in Texas history, but if we're going to move forward in the conversation about what's next, you know, Texas is behind the curve when it comes to talk about early childhood education, and there are districts and states that are focused on pre-K 3, so starting pre-K at 3 years old. I mean, we're really, in terms of our education system, missing prime time in child development, which is 0 to 3. We're nowhere to be seen, right? It's like if you're running a television station and you were only scheduling programming from 11 p.m. to 4 a.m., right? No one's watching, right? And so we need to make sure that we're providing more funding for early childhood education, going beyond just 4-year-olds and reaching even deeper into 0 to 3.
How complex is that? Is that a parent thing? Is that an economic thing? Or is that both? Or is that, how complex is that issue?
You mean providing early childhood education?
Yeah, right. You know, how much onus is on the parents in being involved, you know, the community, the funding. Some parents have to work 2 jobs to make it happen, so they can't be there. You know.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And you see by the time a child reaches pre-K at 4 years old, and certainly by the time they're in kindergarten, those gaps between our low-income students and our affluent students are already persisting. And so we've got to do something earlier on to make sure our students are well prepared. And the investment will pay off. And we'll get a return on investment if we decide to take that route, which I hope we move this conversation even further. I know we want to rest on our laurels today, but tomorrow I hope we start the conversation about pre-K 3 and early childhood education.
Sure, every link in the chain matters, and we're seeing that more and more. As we fall behind, we're less competitive as a state.
That's right. That's exactly right.
So, Hema Muller has some more questions from social media.
And we're streaming this live on Facebook as well. This question comes from one of our viewers there, Anna Smith. She's talking about a specific issue. She says, with the current $223 million fine imposed by the Federal Department of Education for Texas participation in the special education cap, how will we make up funding for special education when we're paying thousands of dollars in fines for Texas refusing to properly fund special education from 2012?
What do you think, Representative?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I think part of the areas that we failed in is trying to address our special education funding. And it's a complex issue, and with the kind of artificial 8% cap and the issues around that, I think the commission and kind of shied away from making recommendations on special education, understandably, because so much is in flux and so much is changing. But we've got to change the way that our funding formula works for special education students. Right now it's based on placement, which is kind of an outdated way of thinking about our special students and how to serve them. We should be really creating a formula based on student need and how to serve those students. That's the way, and I know there was a desire on our public education committee to do that, and we had kind of last minute conversations to see if we could stitch something together, but really if you're going to overhaul something like special ed funding in Texas, you probably need more time to do it than we had in this session because of the recent changes. But I really hope that's a focus going forward, because that funding system we have for SPED has to change because it's woefully outdated.
And I will say that a lot of districts like Austin and others, they've never stopped serving all kids, despite the limitations in the resources. We're probably funded for half of what we actually spend for special education dollars, because we've built out programs for dyslexia and our autism programs. We welcome all students. We get students from all districts who come to our district for our programs. So despite the artificial cap, and I don't think that I think most school districts are doing what they need to serve all students with all disabilities. It'd be great for the funding system to catch up with that. I think we've had some moderate progress in increasing the weights for special education, adding the dyslexia, being able to reimburse for teacher training for autism. Those are mild efforts. But I'm hoping that we can get to something more substantial. But I would say to reassure many of our parents that I think most school districts are trying to serve kids in the best way possible. And the funding is an issue. It does sort of create innovation in how we serve our students. We create hubs and other kinds of ways to make sure all needs are met. But I do think that we definitely have to look at putting more resources into the system to make sure all of our students are successful. If we expect them to meet accountability requirements, then we have to fund it appropriately.
And I think that adjusting that weight was real progress. I don't mean to undermine that. And I think it was something like 85 million put back into our special ed weight system. So there's some progress there, but I hope we can kind of radically rethink how we
now, professional educators, as you mentioned, I mean, they don't want these kids to slip through the cracks, and they're doing above and beyond the money to make it happen.
Absolutely. And so Nicole mentioned that most school districts spend most of the time double what they get in allotment for special ed or even comp ed or some of these dyslexia students. But teachers, in addition, will pull money out of their pocket and go to the store and buy stuff for these students that they need, or help a parent out.
I see it all the time.
Happens all the time.
Now, PTA helps as well. You know, if a teacher with a special needs student needs some help or a field trip, the PTA steps in and makes it happen with busing or special lunches or things like that as well.
Absolutely, and all the programs that we do, we try to make sure that they're accessible for all of our students, regardless if they have special needs, you know, or a handicap or a hearing, you know, disability or something like that. We try to make sure that everyone is included. We truly believe in diversity and inclusion all the way around. So I know a lot of our parents with special needs kids are concerned that it doesn't seem to be a priority for the state. The school districts are doing exactly what they need to do, but when we are advocating, they do kind of feel like they're not, you know, as important as other things. So, but we know that that's not true. We're doing what we can, but certainly in PTA, we have a reflections program, which is the arts is from our national PTA, and we created a special artist category, so that any student can participate in that category, and you would not believe the work and the talent that comes out of there and the pride those children feel. So we certainly try to help, like again, on our end, it's PTA, partnering with our districts to do what we can to help.
And you know, I think corporate America is taking notice too, especially with kids on the spectrum. Dell, SAP, they're starting to hire these students out of high school and college. They're recognizing maybe they can partner with districts and continue to look at that.
That would be great.
That tap into that potential.
Yeah,
let's check. Oh, go on.
I'm just saying, as a mom of kiddos with special needs, I always say, one, thank goodness for IT. There's a place for my special babies at some point in their professional career. But definitely, you know, just we'll always, I mean, I think that we'll always be putting the pressure on the legislators to really fund all of our needs, because, you know, as a CFO, becoming a mom with special needs really changed my understanding of how to support kiddos who need additional supports. I know that at one point in time, I used to look at the bottom line. I used to say, you know, bring down these costs, and I can't understand why the per pupil spending is so much higher. But then when I had my son and I saw that he did need a behavior specialist, he did need some additional readings and supports and some small groups, you can see why the resources are so greatly needed for our kids. So being a mom, being a CFO, it's totally, it wrangles with me every day about the need to find these resources.
And you see it every day, especially in your position. And every parent wants their child to succeed no matter where they are. Let's go to social media now, and Hema has another question.
Yeah, Walter, viewers are asking the tough questions. Don't forget, you can use that hashtag #YourVoiceYourFuture as well. BK Ortego says the Texas Ledge didn't identify a revenue source to maintain a boost in education funding and property tax relief, or suggest spending cuts. So how will this stimulus be sustained?
That's a great question.
$1 billion question.
And like I said earlier, I think that's the exact question that we're going to be asking and hopefully answering in the months to come. You know, I think, you know, I don't want to undervalue the accomplishment that the Texas Legislature has achieved, especially as you mentioned, without a court order. And so I think this is an appropriate second question and follow-up question to ask. And I think hopefully we can all come together across the political aisle and come up with an answer that you know, our students and our teachers deserve.
Or at least find the right balance. I know when I was on the commission, I put forward about $15 billion worth of revenue ideas that weren't substantially taken up. But but even within all those ideas, the feedback that I got, there was such diversity and interest, and unfortunately everything was perceived as a tax increase. But I think next session will be at a new place. I'm hopeful that we can look at rolling back some of those exemptions that you talked about, that I think are sort of things that should automatically be there on the table and be considered. I think some communities have gotten not necessarily passed, but an exemption. And I think that the time has come to really serve all of our communities.
And to be fully transparent, the reason this is difficult at Capitol is because every one of these exemptions has an industry behind it, and every industry has a lobbyist in front of it, right? And so every time you have this discussion, and I'm so grateful you started it, is you have a knock on your Capitol office door with someone who's really upset. But some of these things are ridiculous. I think we've talked about the high cost natural gas exemption, which is about $1 billion per biennium. And we put it in place in the 1980s when it was expensive and difficult to drill for natural gas, but it's not anymore. So it's an outdated exemption that we haven't closed. And I think if we frame it in everyone needs to make a sacrifice to support our students and support the next generation, hopefully with that framing we can have everybody come to the table and make a small sacrifice that will benefit the state in the long term.
Sure, it'll benefit the industries that are trying to get the best talent.
We're all in this together.
That's right.
So we're into the challenges section now, if you couldn't tell. Now, did lawmakers this session actually do something that will noticeably improve education and ease Texans' property tax burdens? From the beginning of the conversation, the answer seems to be clearly yes. This is just the beginning. They did ease burdens and improve education from what you guys are saying. Is this a baby step, a giant leap? Is the road ahead long and hard?
I think it's a giant leap. I really think so. I think both on the education front and on the property tax front. This is certainly not going to cure every problem we have in our system, but it's a huge leap forward. We were going to be in the low. The public education in Texas is funded primarily by local sources of revenue, property taxes, and state funding, and that balance has gotten out of whack to where the state has fallen below its obligation for what it should be paying for public schools, and therefore local property taxpayers and local communities have stepped up and taken that responsibility on with higher property taxes. If we continued on our current trajectory, by the end of next school year, it would have been 34-33% of total funding would come from the state, and the rest coming from local property taxes. Because of this bill, it'll now be 45%, so much closer to a 50-50 balance, which is what we want to achieve. Hopefully we can come back in future sessions and finally make it a 50-50 balance, because local communities shouldn't be the ones shouldering the entire burden of teaching our next generation of Texans.
I know in the commission we talked about having sort of the three-legged stool, and I think that one of the things, it goes back to the question that we just had earlier, revenue sources. To the extent that we can make progress on diversifying the revenue source, we can take pressure off for local property taxes. But that doesn't come without yielding and finding some consistency around balancing out these different tax policy decisions. And so that's going to present its own sort of challenge for you, probably many different challenges. Simple things like even rolling back the yacht sales tax is something that doesn't come without some fervor in those impacted communities.
The next tweet is going to be from the yacht lobby.
I know. Nicole, how could you take off the yacht exemption? Well, if you can afford a yacht.
So what I'm hearing is that the options and answers are out there. It's just kind of hammering out the details to get them into the next session to make it.
The parents are going to be pushing for us to figure something out so this continues. So we've been fighting for a really long time. We can exhale for a minute because we are concerned about that very question that keeps coming up tonight, is how are we going to, maintain this? And we know that we tend to put our money behind the things that are most important and to parents, and should be to the state and country. Our kids' education should be most important because that determines our future. So we finally feel like we've been heard with this bill, that finally education is a priority. Keeping it there is our concern. So we'll be pushing to try to see even what we can do on our end to make sure that it continues to be a top priority in the state of Texas.
Professional educators, I guess, agree with that too.
Absolutely, and we'll work side by side with the PTA and other education leaders across the state to one, educate educators on the political process, and two, to try to influence the legislature to take that next second step. We've made a good first step. Now it's time next session to make a good second step.
Teachers seem to have a bigger voice this session, or maybe it was just me. I just saw more rallies, I saw more grassroots, I saw more flyers and phone campaigns. It just seemed like they were saying, this is our chance and we got to take it.
Yeah, educators all across the state have realized that they've got to be involved in the process. You can't sit on the sidelines and just accept what comes your way. You got to get involved in check into the game and put a few shots up and start talking to your local legislator and coming up here to the Capitol and making your voice heard on things that you want or you don't want.
Mm-hmm. And that was good to see the activism.
And honestly, it's a testament to the two people across the table, Sherry and Shannon, and groups just like theirs that really organized and rallied teachers, not only during the legislative session, but in the election season. So being involved in the entire democratic process. And teachers across the state voted as single issue voters for the first time, where public education was their #1 and only issue that they voted on. And that meant they voted for pro-public education Republicans and pro-public education Democrats. And folks on both sides of the aisle who didn't support public schools received the consequences at the ballot box. And that's exactly what I think our educators need to do. They need to stand up, speak up for themselves, and most importantly for their students.
Yeah,
and parents as well.
That's right. Giving them a voice. Yeah.
Exactly. At our last rally day, we had the largest attendance ever, and that was 2,700. And there were over 1,000 students. So not only are we rallying the parents to finally speak up and get involved in this process, but we're also teaching our young people as well to get in there and learn how to advocate for themselves. This is their school and their future. And so the parents have woken up in PTA, as many legislators know. Yep. We put that call out and they respond. So that's really exciting to see. So I think if we're all involved and continue to be that way, then we really do have a chance to make a huge difference in education and secure a great future.
Well, what I saw this session as well, you guys took the scary part out of it. It's scary to talk to government and rally and go to the Capitol and knock on doors, but every person made a difference to make their voices heard. And there was a lot of excitement on this bill, so that was fun to see. Let's check in with Hema now for another question.
Our viewers really have some great questions for the panel. This one comes from Texas Buck, who says, with the constant need for filling teaching positions, how is the discussion going with TEA addressing relaxing restrictions for experienced retired teachers to re-enter the class?
That's okay. That's all right. Yeah, I support efforts to make sure we're making it easier for folks to enter into the profession, and not just retired teachers, but also folks looking for alternative certification. I was an alternatively certified teacher. I didn't go through the traditional college of education, and I think we want to make sure we're opening those pathways for more folks to come in. And maybe the most important thing we're doing to recruit teachers and stop teacher turnover is increasing teacher pay and teacher compensation. I think the research shows that's the best way to make sure we're keeping teachers in the classroom, ensuring that they feel like they're treated like the professionals they are. And that's partly why I'm excited about some of the initiatives that have been put in here to pay teachers based on different metrics that are locally decided, whether it's by experience or whether it's by teaching quality or principal observation or student feedback. Making sure that we have pathways for teachers to advance and excel and receive attention and prestige for the work they're doing is going to attract more people to the profession.
Sure.
What you don't want is someone entering into the teaching profession and then 10 years later making only $3,000 more than they were 10 years ago, right?
Yeah.
And not receiving any acclaim or any credit. No other profession, no lawyer, no doctor, no news person would accept that same kind of dynamic. But for some reason it's okay for teachers.
Right, so I agree. So recruitment and retention are very important, and increasing teacher compensation is going to help in those areas. One of the other things that came out of this session is some increase in teacher mentoring. I think about $8 million went into teacher mentoring for first-time educators. And so one, getting them in the door, getting them comfortable in the classroom, and then finding a way to pay them appropriately and retain them in the profession, I think will have lasting benefits.
Well, and that's why we were looking for flexibility in the bill, because not only experience, but just hard to staff areas. We're looking for teachers that have bilingual certifications, special ed teachers that have those needs that are particular to certain student groups. So we wanted to have that latitude to be able to apply the compensation to the unique sort of district needs. And so that flexibility is going to be important. So we're going to be watching the commissioner's rules as to how this bill rolls out.
Well, teachers have a special DNA. A lot of them don't get into it to have the yacht exemption, right? You know, but we do want to recognize their abilities and their merit, and as they move kids up. There was always that one teacher you loved and you wished you could give him more money, and he changed your life, right? So as we move forward now, and as we start wrapping up this roundtable, what was left out? I want to talk to all of you guys. What was left out, or what do you think needs to happen as we go back to the next session? So parents, you know, we saw them getting off the sidelines, which was exciting.
Oh, yes.
Is there anything more that you would like to see from the PTA side in the next bill or the next type of discussion?
I think with the infusion of the new monies and some of it that's tagged for certain programs and things like that, a way to partner better with PTA would be when the teachers learn how to work a little bit more in partnership with the families that are there, because the kids need the family and they need the teacher to kind of be on the same page so that they can be the best that they can be. And I know that's not something that the legislature is in control of, but certainly some of the curriculum for the teachers, so that we do all feel like we're in this together and the students know that they have the whole community behind them. But, you know, other than that, just going forward, just continuing to find some other revenue to make sure that those funds are there, and that our concerns are heard.
Now, as professional educators look at this, of course they would like more money. It'd be nice to in the next session to get some of that. What do you see, or what was left out, or what would you like to see happen next?
So I think there are some opportunities to, one, take that second step like I talked about earlier, and maybe in additional compensation for teachers, or buying down the cost of health insurance, or fixing the health insurance program. A lot of times teachers may get a 2 or 3 or 4% increase in their compensation, but they're getting 11, 12, and 13% increases in health insurance premiums. And so sometimes they're taking home net losses year over year. And so I think we made a big stride this year with House Bill 3 in fixing some of, at least infusing some more money into the system. But I think that we can go further and try to fix some of these other things that are affecting educators, and not just teachers, but everyone who works in the public education system.
Sure, top of mind, and it went through. I mean, we debated this, what did you say, 20 years, and finally we're starting to see some action. You know, school's out for the summer. Are you going to get a vacation? You know?
I wish.
Are you looking at what we need to change, or is there anything that was left out that you wanted to see?
Yes, I'd like to see us, and there are components that are in the bill or language. The cost of education index, that was taken out or repealed to sort of infuse dollars into the basic allotment. But in my mind, there are regional differences for the cost for providing services. Many of our teachers can't even live in the communities that they serve. So I'd like to close some of that affordability gap for teachers that are in high cost areas, and recognizing that in the basic foundation of the funding formula. The 6160 in Austin doesn't go as far as 6160 in another place in Texas. So I'd like to see some meaningful attention to sort of revisiting that, if at all, if there's an opportunity. Also just making sure that we deepen, and some of it is in the bill with the post-secondary success and some of the career launch programs, but really making sure that there's no question if a kid is economically disadvantaged that they can go to college if they qualify and they want to. Many districts have created partnerships with their higher ed, their community colleges to create those opportunities for students. Others, like Austin, are building those partnerships but still having to heavily subsidize them. And I'd hate to see those dollars constrain our students' future. We quantify the impact of students who graduate who don't have post-secondary success. We're talking about $1 million out of the lifetime earnings for those students. And so that is real money out of their pockets, that not to mention sales tax loss and revenue loss. If Texas is going to maintain its economic prowess, we have to sustain the human capital. I'd venture to say that everybody has to have skin in the game. I think some community, their business community, recognizes that they're the biggest consumers of public education. And so we all need to be steering towards those same goals for all of our students. And I don't think there's time to let up. So there's, between the CEI and just the need to get everybody to understand the importance and the value of education, we're gonna be busy next session.
So in sports, they say we're going to celebrate tonight, but tomorrow we got to get back to work.
That's
Is
right.
that the deal?
That's right. Yes.
What would you like to see?
Well, first, I'm incredibly proud of the school finance reform package. I mean, $11.6 billion for our system, 6.5 that's going directly to districts and classrooms, and 5.1 going to relieve our property taxpayers. It's going to help districts in Austin and Central Texas and in Williamson County that I represent. But obviously, as an education policy nerd, there's a lot more that I want to do. We've mentioned some of them. Focus on the middle grades, making sure that we're going down to 3 years old in pre-K. We talked about special education funding. We didn't talk about gifted and talented, but trying to make sure we have dedicated funding for gifted and talented. But I'll say if I can only pick one thing that I'd like to focus on next, it's mental health in our public schools and social emotional learning. And we have to figure out a way to reconfigure our education system to teach and serve the whole student, not just academics. There's so much more, as all of you know, to raising kids and developing human beings than reading, writing, and arithmetic. And so really I think that's the next frontier in this conversation is how do we make sure our schools are serving the whole student and not just focused on academics.
Well, thank you for fighting for our kids and our education. And this is a great big step. A lot of people didn't think we'd see it. Yeah. So thank you for your hard work and your efforts. And you know, this is your voice, your future. Thank you for joining us for this town hall session. You can find more online at cbsaustin.com. For everyone on the panel, I'm Walt Macaborski. Thank you and have a great night.